Ready? Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Ed Bechtel from Bechtel's Pharmacy, and we're here again at the Slatington Public Library to do our monthly Sweet Spot Diabetes Lecture. Today's topic is counting carbs. So we'll do a little review of some of the sweet spot basic truths. There are two types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. In type 1 diabetes, the body doesn't make insulin at all or makes very little insulin. In type 2 diabetes, the body can make insulin but doesn't use it properly. If you're not sure which type of diabetes that you have, we could probably tell by what medications you take, and we could talk about it afterwards. So what should your blood sugar be? Fasting blood sugar, which is your blood sugar first thing in the morning before you eat breakfast, should be between 70 and 130 or 70 and 125, depending on whose guidelines you're following. After you eat, an hour or two after you eat, your sugar should go up to no more than 180. So how do we keep our blood sugar under control? There's kind of a three-pronged approach. Some people call it the three-legged stool, with the three legs being healthy eating, exercise, and medications. And insulin is included in the medications. You'll note that 2 out of 3 of those are totally under your control, and even the third one, the medications, your doctor helps you with that, but it's up to you to take the medications, as they're prescribed and as you need them. You can't eat that. It has too much sugar. You've heard that, I'm sure, if you're diabetic. But are sugary foods really the only thing that can raise your blood sugar? No. Your body will turn whatever you eat into glucose eventually. Carbohydrates, that happens very quickly. For proteins, that takes 3 to 5 hours. For fats, it takes up to 8. Your body will turn anything into sugar eventually, given time. Glucose is the only thing the cells of the body can use for energy. So, if you're going to have energy, your body has to get glucose into the cells where it can be used for energy. Certain foods break down into glucose or sugar right after consumption. So let's discuss how you can count the number of carbohydrates in foods as a method of controlling your blood sugar. I know you'll feel better about the food choices you make. The food can be divided into 3 basic groups: carbohydrates, carbs, proteins, and fats. Examples of foods containing carbohydrates are grains, dairy, fruits, and vegetables. Beef, poultry, beans, and nuts are good sources of proteins. Fats are found in butter. Some good fats are found in nuts. Fats can be found in, sugary foods, baked goods. It's important to remember that foods can contain a combination of all 3 of these groups. For example, Pop-Tarts contains fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. In diabetes, we often focus on carbohydrates because they affect blood glucose more than the others. The amount of carbohydrates you consume determines how high your blood sugar will rise and how much insulin your body will need to lower that blood sugar. It's important to know which foods have carbohydrates and how many servings will keep your blood sugar within a target range. Carbohydrates can be counted as grams or servings, but servings can be confusing. Therefore, the easiest way to count carbohydrates is as grams. Carbohydrate counting can be used by all diabetics. Ask your doctor, a certified diabetes educator, or dietitian if you should count carbohydrates. Carbohydrate counting can be used to adjust the amount of carbs you eat during a meal or a snack. For example, if your blood glucose is within your goal range, you can consume the calculated servings to keep your blood sugar within that range. If it's too high, you may need to limit your carb intake. Carbohydrate counting may also be used by insulin-dependent diabetics to calculate how much insulin they give themselves before a meal based on how many carbohydrate servings the meal can contain. So a lot of type 1 diabetics, people that don't make their own insulin, they'll use a long-acting insulin to give them a baseline, and that'll take care of the carbohydrates that are produced from the fats and the proteins that they eat, and then they take a short-acting insulin to take care of the carbohydrates that are going to come quickly after eating a meal or snack. The easiest way to count your carbohydrates is to read the nutritional facts label for a given food item. First, focus on the total carbohydrates. This is the total sugar, starch, and fiber. Then focus on the serving size to calculate the amount of this item you may eat to remain within your target goal for your meal or snack. Using the nutritional facts on the label, on this label, there's a total of 15 grams of carbohydrates in 1 ounce of Lay's potato chips. For foods without a nutrient label, you may use commonly accepted values listed on the next slide to estimate your carbs. Similar lists for additional food items can be found online or by conducting a simple search. My daughter used to work at the University of Pennsylvania Center for Weight and Eating Disorders, and they used what's that?
King's Calorie?
Yeah, the Calorie King. You can get that in the book. You can get it as an app for your smartphone. And it contains a whole bunch of nutritional information, not just calories and carbs, but also like sodium content and fat content for, literally thousands of different foods. So that's a reference that they used and that you could use to help with, estimating, things that you don't have a label for. I mean, there's not a label on every potato that you're going to put in the oven and bake. There's not a label on every banana, but bananas can come from this big to that big. So one banana, not every banana is 35 carbs. Some might be 25 and some might be 45.
You gotta get yourself a scale.
Are they that high? Are you?
Yeah.
Bananas are that high in carbs?
Oh, they are.
A banana.
I put a banana in my cereal every
I was
morning.
gonna say, a banana could be almost like your whole, if you're allowed a meal.
But
You can eat a half a banana though.
Well, that's what I didn't put in half.
But a banana also has fiber. It also has nutrients. So
We don't.
so you have to look at, is this food item going to provide nutrition as well as, don't just look at carbs.
That's where it gets confusing though, because if you look at your carbs is what puts your sugar up.
Right. So you have to, the carbs have to be part of your meal.
Yeah.
And then you have to look at the whole thing.
Yeah, that's where it starts to get too confusing.
There are carbs that come with nutrition, and there are carbs that are empty.
Yep.
Drinking a 20-ounce Coke, there's no nutritional value and a whole lot of carbohydrates.
Like eggs, when I buy eggs, I take them out and put them in my tray, and I fill the box away. And then I go, geez, how much carbs are in an egg?
Oh, you can eat
Yeah,
the whole
not-
carton and not get all the carbs in for the
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, you could probably get more carbs by eating the carton than you would by eating the eggs.
I bought
don't
any
eat
new
the
eggs
yolk.
yet, so I
Oh,
don't
you
know.
could eat- you
I
could
don't
eat a
know the
lot of
nutrition
eggs,
facts
yeah.
on it.
Yeah.
And I threw it away. And it's
But
good
you're
for
saying
about a
don't
month.
eat the yolk.
Yeah, don't eat the yolks.
Well, that's.
But
I mean, that's where your cholesterol.
nutrients are.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's,
Eggs got a bad name for a long time,
Yeah.
but you know they've found that there's a lot of good nutrition in eggs. That
if you're only watching carbs.
There you go.
It's a lot more than you think you can.
the
It's a low carb diet.
Yeah.
the bottom line is moderation in anything. You know, having a half a dozen eggs is not a good thing. Having an egg or two for breakfast.
Throw a pound of bacon on top.
Well, I don't know
Any
that.
carbs,
I-
bacon too, though.
I
yeah.
saw that on the.
Any meat, there's no
I
carbs.
saw that.
But I don't know that you could make a good argument
You eat all that
for bacon as a health food.
I look at it this way, you're frying the fat off.
What I do, I cut all the fat off around the meat.
Well, then you don't have no meat left.
Well, I only get by the meat with that looks good, you know, and that's what I do, or the bacon ends. You know,
So nutritional labels are your best sorts for carb counting, but when there's not a label or convenient reference, you may need to use an estimate. The American Diabetes Association publishes a helpful book entitled Diabetes Carbohydrate and Fat Gram Guide. While the focus is on carbohydrates with regard to your blood sugar, we can't forget about the other nutrients that impact your health. For example, don't ignore saturated fats and sodium for your overall heart health and calories for weight management. Here's a list of common foods that, be 15 grams of carbohydrate. Looking for a banana on there, I don't see one. But a small piece of fruit.
one slice of bread, depends what kind of bread it is.
Some people don't think about, 6 chicken nuggets has the same amount of carbohydrate as a slice of bread.
Yeah,
Some people don't think about the breading on.
that's right.
If you like bread, Walmart has a whole wheat bread that you can get 2 slices for 13 carbs for 2 slices. But you won't find it anywhere else. So that's a good one.
They have sugar-free bread too.
Well, whole grain breads are.
Supposed to be better.
Well, we'll talk about glycemic index in a couple minutes, but are better than
Yeah, banana
White
is
bread.
27 carbs for a banana.
an average banana.
For a medium banana,
Yeah.
27 grams of carbs.
So if we're estimating, and Mrs. B, am I allowed to tell stories about you? Well, my wife was diagnosed with diabetes. That was the nutritional part was one of my the holes in my knowledge base. So we met with a dietitian because we wanted to be able to go out to eat. We were good counting carbs as long as we were at home. But when we got out where we didn't have a scale, a cup, a measure, we had to be able to, look at a plate and say, okay, well, the rice on that plate, that's, 30 carbs. That piece of, So we learned a lot about serving sizes. So here's an example of serving sizes. A teaspoon, the size of 1 die in a pair of dice. 1 die. Tablespoon, your thumb. A serving of meat or poultry, the size of a deck of cards. I mean, when was the last time you saw a steak the size of a deck of cards? You go out and you have a steak, you should take half of it home. Take half of it home with you. Have it a second time.
Yeah, but there's not a lot of carbs in that, so.
No, but depending on what kind of steak and how well it's marbled, there could be a lot of fat in it, and that's not good either. But when I was back when I was in college, they used to tell us, diabetics, you need to eliminate the carbs. You can tell people they can go to McDonald's and have a cheeseburger, just throw away the bun. Well, what we did with that advice is we gave people kidney disease and heart attacks because we were loading them up with fat and protein. You know, a balanced approach is the way you have to go.
Good fillet of fish.
Well, even there.
Those are high. Those aren't all that good for you.
Well, I mean, trying to remember the chicken sandwiches the breaded chicken sandwiches at McDonald's that are breaded and deep fried. There's more fat in that than a cheeseburger.
The fillet of fish, I used to think, oh, fillet of fish, that's good for me.
Yeah, yeah. When you bread it and then you deep fry it,
It's one of the worst things you can
yeah.
There's only 35 grams of carbs though in the fillet of fish.
Yeah, but what are the calories for those 35 carbs? It's not worth it.
Slice, the tartar.
You know,
the
if you
roll.
look at the
No,
whole
it says
picture.
total, so that would be.
Yeah, that would
corn,
be-
cheese and everything.
Yep.
But yet your calories on that is higher than what their plain hamburger is.
Calories.
379.
And their plain hamburger, I think, is only like 310. So, I mean, you got to look at the whole picture. You
Right.
just can't cut out
Right.
the carbs.
We come back to moderation.
Hamburger's only 29, it is less.
Never done that.
Like,
So,
so you need the grilled.
so what's on your plate? So looking at this plate, we have a slice of pizza, a salad, and a small apple. The nutritional facts label from our frozen pizza box shows that our slice of pizza contains 42 grams of total carbohydrate. Our side salad has 1.5 cups of iceberg lettuce, 3 cherry tomatoes, a half a cup of cheddar cheese, and 2 tablespoons of ranch dressing. Using our carb counter resource located online, we calculate that the lettuce adds 1.5 grams of carbohydrate, the tomatoes add 1 gram of carbohydrate, the cheese adds 1 gram, the ranch dressing adds 2 grams. The small apple is about 15 grams of carbohydrate. We choose to drink water with our meal. Our carbohydrate count for this meal is 62.5 grams. That doesn't look like much of a meal, does it? According to the American Diabetes Association, a good total carb count for a meal is 45 to 60 grams of carbohydrate.
That's nothing.
Oh, my doctor has me at 40 a meal.
Okay.
Was it 45 to 60?
45 to 60 is what the ADA recommends.
I can eat a heck of a lot more for 60.
I guess you gotta be a bunny to live on lettuce.
Well, I mean, if you go by the government My Plate method, half of your plate should be green leafy vegetables. So,
The more
yeah,
color, the better.
And I
yep.
found a dressing that had no calories, no carbs, no fat, no nothing in it. But it
That's
has
a
sodium.
flavor.
But it has sodium.
You just say
Yeah.
no taste.
Oh, it does have taste. It was a honey mustard, and you know what? Surprisingly, it did taste good, but it had more sodium.
Yeah.
There's one.
Wonder what made it sweet in a honey mustard. There's got to be
Mustard.
Good.
artificial
No
sweetener.
calories.
Okay.
If you want any good flavor, they say to cook with mustard. Because there's no carbs in mustard.
So now let's turn our attention to something called the glycemic index. A couple months ago, we did a whole session on glycemic index.
Another
That, well, have you ever wondered why some foods tend to increase your blood sugar more than others? Many times the carb amounts are the same, but one particular food raises your blood sugar more than others. Examples? Any?
Pizza.
Well, pizza, you have the flour, you have the lactose that's in the cheese. Depending on what sauce they're using, there may be sugar in the spaghetti sauce.
Even if it's the same number of carbs. Beans.
Well, beans have a lower glycemic index, so
but it's
beans,
higher in carbs.
Well, pasta.
pasta's going to have a higher, and you can change the glycemic index by cooking it. So pasta that's boiled till it's practically mushy has a higher glycemic index than pasta that's al dente. Body doesn't have to work as hard to break it down and get it into the bloodstream. The juice from an orange is going to have a higher glycemic index than, eating the whole orange, even though the carbs might be the same. Your body doesn't have to work as hard to get that sugar into the bloodstream. So some foods raise blood sugar faster and higher than others. We can now measure this, and we call that the glycemic index. The glycemic index was developed by comparing the effect on blood sugar after consuming 50 grams of a carbohydrate food with a reference food, either glucose or white bread. The glycemic index foods are reported on a scale of 0 to 100. Foods with a high glycemic index score are those that raise blood sugar more and are typically more rapidly digested and absorbed. Foods with a low glycemic index score produce gradual rises in blood sugar, and insulin levels are believed to have benefit to your health. Now, just because something has a low glycemic index doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for you. When we did the talk a couple months ago, a Snickers bar has a relatively low glycemic index, but that doesn't mean a Snickers bar is good for you. But a lot of the calories in a Snickers bar are from the fat in the peanuts, so it affects your blood sugar for a longer period of time. It doesn't spike the sugar right away the way a glass of orange juice or a bottle of Coke would. Research has proven that different carbohydrates affect blood glucose in different ways. We see illustrated in this graph, cheese puffs, indicated by the black triangles, raise blood glucose more and for a longer period of time than other tested carbohydrates of fruit leather, indicated by the white triangle. The black circles on the left and the white circles on the right indicate the reference food for which the test food, cheese puffs, and imagine fruit leather is like fruit roll-ups. Yeah. Fruit roll-ups was compared for the GI calculation. The take-home point from this slide is that the effect of food on blood glucose over time. The cheese puffs, for example, raised the test patient's blood glucose more and for a longer period of time when compared to the fruit roll-up.
But cheese curls is low in carbs.
Not necessarily.
Well, they are, because I know that when I eat those.
Things also, your rankings also change by brands. Like one brand of cheese puffs compared to another brand of cheese puffs,
Right.
it's completely different.
And that might have to do with, what they're using, not the cheese on the outside so much, but what they're using for the puffs. So how are the glycemic index values determined? The previous graph illustrated the method by which GI is determined. Remember, GI is a value assigned to the carbohydrate-containing food based on a calculation of blood sugar change over time from real test patients. The test patients ingest the test food, and their blood sugar is plotted and compared to the reference food. Calculations are made based on the plotted points to determine the glycemic index value or number. Using our previous examples of cheese puffs and fruit roll-ups, the GI value for cheese puffs was determined to be 74.3, and for the fruit roll-ups to be 33.2. Remember, the previous graph did not show these values. They're derived from a mathematical calculation and are only relevant when compared to a reference food. So to simplify things, the glycemic index scale can be broken down into low, medium, and high glycemic index foods. Low glycemic index foods have a score of less than 55, medium from 56 to 69, and high greater than 70. Remember, the reference food is either white bread or glucose and has a value of 100. Pretzels.
No, they're not.
What's that?
Say that now. But they're good.
There are several factors that influence the glycemic index of carbohydrate-containing foods. Usually, the more cooked or processed the food, the higher the glycemic index. Higher processed foods require less digestion and are absorbed more quickly. The cooking method used to prepare a food can lead to a higher glycemic index. For example, al dente pasta has a lower GI than pasta cooked for a longer period of time. More ripe fruits and vegetables have a higher glycemic index. Carbohydrate-containing foods that also contain fat and or fiber typically have lower glycemic indexes. That's why those beans, the complex carbohydrates in the beans, bring the glycemic index down. That's why beans are better than pasta or rice. This slide shows some common glycemic index values. It's important to remember that the glycemic index does not consider the nutritional value of a food. Many nutritious foods have a high GI, and foods with a lower GI may have little or no nutritional value. For example, watermelon has a higher GI than Coca-Cola. It's also important to note that the glycemic index value should be used with other nutritional information for meal planning. Unfortunately, glycemic index values are not listed on nutritional labels, but a more complete list of glycemic index values is available online. I tried to find a couple months ago just like a one-page thing with a whole online. I couldn't find anything that I liked.
Glycemic index. That's right.
So what's more important, counting carbs or glycemic index?
Carbs is easier.
Well, how do they relate? Carb counting is just that, counting the total number of carbohydrates in a meal or a snack. It's a tally. Glycemic index ranks the food's effect on blood sugar. Glycemic index measures the quality of the food in the meal with regard to blood sugar only. The glycemic index value doesn't take into consideration the amount of carbohydrates eaten, and the carb count does not take into account the type of carbohydrate eating. So using both, when you're meal planning. Statement by the American Diabetes Association on dietary carbohydrates states that both the amount and type of carbohydrates influence blood glucose, and that monitoring total grams of carbohydrate remains a key strategy in achieving glycemic control. The ADA also states that the amount of carbohydrates in food is generally a stronger predictor of blood glucose response than the glycemic index. So use them both, but counting carbs is more important. So what are the recommendations for meal planning with regard to carbohydrate counting and the glycemic index? Carbohydrate counting should be the primary strategy used for meal planning, but the glycemic index may help diabetics make better food choices to achieve their blood glucose goals. The most successful meal planning strategy would include both carbohydrate counting with glycemic index as an additional benefit. However, there have been some obstacles to using the GI mainstream. These obstacles include variability in glycemic index values due to a lack of standardization and variability due to the preparation factors previously stated, for example, cook time and the absence of GI values on nutritional labels.
Okay. Answer my question.
How do you know what the glycemic index is?
Index on and it's not.
Yeah, it's not.
You have to have your own.
In summary, carbohydrate counting measures the total amount of carbohydrates in grams consumed in a meal or snack. The glycemic index is the rank of the effect of a food on the blood sugar expressed as a number value. It gives us a concept of good carbs versus better carbs when planning our meal. Based on current research, carbohydrate counting should be the first step in managing postprandial blood sugar. Successful diabetic patients balance total carbohydrate intake with physical activity and anti-diabetic medications or insulin. Glycemic index may be used as an additional meal planning strategy. And that's our recipe for the month.
Yeah, it used to give the carbs.
What's that?
Nutritional information.
Yeah, I think the recipe was so long and involved they didn't have room for it on the card.
It's just that loaded with that many carbs that they don't want us to know.
Maybe. But it's healthier than the Swanson chicken pie. Theoretically. Any questions? Comments?
I want to know what I can eat as much of that I want. Like for a snack
One
or,
item,
yeah, like.
You can eat
I
anything.
also have to watch
Crushed ice
cholesterol. So, I mean, I'm not as, worried about the cholesterol. I'm just pre-diabetic, but what can I eat that I don't have to worry about anything?
Your body will turn any food that you eat, eventually it will turn it into glucose. So, if you're pre-diabetic or you're type 2 diabetic, total calories is something that you need to watch. Carbohydrates, cause a spike in blood sugar after you eat. So you want to try to stay away from simple carbohydrates. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to eliminate everything. Because what happens if you say, you can't have this, you can't have that, is you start to crave this and you start to crave that, and then when you give in, you tend to go bonkers. So,
Well, a carrot at 10 o'clock at night just doesn't fill me.
I know what it is.
But a carrot is high.
The one thing that will satisfy
Carrots are
you,
high in carbs.
I have the answer.
I have freeze.
Water.
Yeah,
It
Drink
fills
enough
you
of
up.
that.
yeah.
It fills you up, and that's what my nutritionist says. You must drink 64 ounces of water a day and low carbs. Give me a menu and stuff.
yeah, and look at the
It
quality.
fills you up, and then you don't have that craving anymore.
Did your doctor tell you how many carbs you're allowed to have?
She told me 30 to 45 a week.
And what'd she tell you?
45 is kind
She
of,
didn't say anything about snacks.
My doctor told me 40 a meal, 15 a snack. 3 meals a day, 2 snacks a day.
What type of snacks did?
Any snacks. You can have whatever you want. It's just got to be 15 carbs for snacks, 40 carbs for meal. So she said eat whatever you want, but that's what you're allowed to have. So like I heard you say pretzels earlier. If you listen. But if you like pretzels, get the sticks versus the pretzel, because you can eat a heck of a lot more sticks than you can a pretzel. You got to make like a little game out of it.
Yeah.
You can have 9 tater tots. No,
But I'm
Boing.
I'm not a big sweets eater, like,
Yeah.
but I thought, oh, fruit, I can eat as much fruit as I want.
Ooh,
Yeah.
fruits, Scott.
well,
Yeah,
I mean, the thing about fruit is that fruit has fiber.
right.
And fiber
Yeah.
is going to, it's going to stretch that time that it takes the body to absorb the sugar. So eating fruit is better than eating candy. Eating fruit is better than drinking fruit juice. Eating whole fruits.
Milk. milk is better.
Well, what happens when they take the fat out, as you go from whole milk to 2% to 1% to skim,
Okay.
you take the fat out and then the sugar concentrates. So if you read the labels, whole milk will look like it has less sugar. Then, a glass of whole milk will look like it has less sugar than a glass of skim milk, but it's also got a lot of fat too, and if you're worried about your heart, you don't want necessarily all that fat. So, I mean, that's,
We're doomed.
well,
If it tastes good, don't eat it.
Gotta be a bunny. Lettuce, lettuce, lettuce.
How much does genetics
And water,
play
water,
in
water.
diabetes and all this?
huge.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
what I was-
especially type 2 diabetes. There's a very strong relationship between
And if
genetics and type 2
what I've
diabetes.
been reading and hearing from different people, if your sugar's high but your triglycerides are within line, that's almost an immediate indication that it's purely genetics.
I haven't heard that, but
Yeah, I've been hearing that. Well, my my brother's doctor told him that.
yeah.
I mean, I have a daughter.
Usually, if your sugar's out of line for a period of time, eventually the triglycerides are going to go up too.
I look at it this way, I made it to 64. My mom and dad were both diabetic in their 40s, so I thought I did pretty good in that respect. So, I mean, you're trying, but if
Right.
genetics plays a lot into it.
You don't get to pick your parents.
Right, and like my daughter, she eats no fast food, goes to the gym 4 times a week, blah, 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 healthy. Her numbers are worse than mine. And her doctor told her it's genetics. And she called me and said, gee, thanks, Mom. I printed mine out. Our numbers are identical, and she's only 38.
Oh.
And it's like, what? In that respect, there's nothing you can do.
I don't need
Well,
that's why
I mean, you
don't
can
do
you
it, but I
Yeah.
can get it to the point that you're staying steady, that you're not going overboard, but you're not going to get your numbers down, I don't believe, without meds.
Well, I mean, there are some people, and you'll see this periodically. Somebody will put something on the internet that they cured their diabetes without medication. Well, if you're a type 2 diabetic, you have a genetic predisposition. That doesn't mean that you will definitely be diabetic,
Right.
but
Just go and get yourself some bone pills.
the risk is higher. Now, if you exercise and you watch what you eat and you maintain a healthy weight, I mean, you can have numbers that say that you're not diabetic, but you cannot change that underlying genetic predisposition. So what your daughter's doing, going to the gym, eating right, she's going to live longer that way.
But like she says, she tries. She hasn't
Yeah.
had a fast food in like 4 years.
Yeah, it's frustrating. It's frustrating. Oftentimes when people are diagnosed, their blood sugars might be 350, 400. And when your sugar's that high, your body recognizes that extra glucose in your bloodstream as being a poison and wants to get rid of it.
Right.
So the kidneys take it out. That's why, excessive thirst and excessive urination are 2 of the symptoms of diabetes. Well, now you get put on insulin or you get put on an oral medication to get your blood sugar down. Now those calories that you were peeing away, because that sugar that was going out in your urine, those are calories peeing away. Now your body's retaining those. And what does your body do with calories that it doesn't need right now? Stores it for later, turns it into fat. So you get your doctor saying, oh, you're diabetic, you gotta lose weight, and he gives you metformin, and metformin brings your sugar down. But you can't for the life of you, no matter how little you try to eat, you can't lose weight. Because it's the drug that's...
The drugs are bad.
Well, the drugs aren't bad, but the drug is contributing to the weight gain.
Yeah.
So it's one or the other. Like
Yeah,
with me,
so-
I can usually get my sugar down, but then my fats are up, or I get my cholesterol down, then sugar. It's like I finally told the doctor, pick one that you want me to be on meds. I can't seem to do both. It's either one or the other all the time.
What's that?
Is your daughter on
Why you
medication?
No, not
but
yet.
Because of what?
Why you can't lose weight when you go on?
But she's doing.
Well, because I
everything.
lost a crap load of weight, and then I plateaued.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And then I watch so much what I eat, and now the weight's slowly going back on. But I'm not on the medicine no more. You know what I mean? So, but I can't get the weight back off. But I'm not cheating. I'm just.
Yeah. There was an article in Time Magazine a few months ago. You know, logically you think, you know, you take this many calories in, you exercise, that burns this many calories. So it's an equation. Mm-hmm. If you want to lose weight, you got to take less in. You got to. Well, they found, you know, over the years that people drastically cut the amount of calories that they take in and they lose weight, and then the body adjusts. And they think that evolutionary, like through evolution, that our, you know, we've survived as a species because when the calories aren't available, when there's food not readily available in times of drought and famine, you know, our bodies adjust. And the metabolism slows down. And that just because you start, you know, taking those calories in, that something inside us clicks that says, there may be a time in the future where I'm going to have that time of famine again. I better store stuff up. And you don't necessarily go back to, you know, 1,000 calories in, 1,000, you know, 1,000 calories in, 15 calories out is going to, you know, just burn the fat off the way you think it would. Did that make any sense?
Yeah.
You know, your body, something in your body, you know, adjusts to that, you know, lack of caloric intake.
Yeah.
And then it's
I
trying
believe
to
that
store.
because I'm doing just what I was doing before, and nothing's happening. So.
But, you know, at one time you were taking in more calories that were required to maintain this weight. When you cut the calories, you know, that just at rest, somebody that's bigger needs to take in more calories than somebody that's smaller. I mean, just breathing, I burn more calories than you do just breathing because I'm bigger than you. You know, so I mean, there's also a baseline there too. When you before you lost the weight, you know, the amount of calories that you had to cut down to lose that weight. Now you're down closer to the calorie, you know, where there's an equilibrium.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, you know, by that article in Time Magazine, your body may have, you know, flicked the switch and said, okay, we have to live on less calories. We're going to make it harder for.
So maybe you have to kickstart some other type of exercise to.
Well, she walks a lot.
Yeah.
Well, maybe.
I bought a bike now for at work. I figure if I got to sit there, I rode the bike yesterday for 10 hours. Other than when a customer comes in, I get up to wait on them. But the rest of the time, I'm sitting there riding a bike. I'm on my computer, pedaling on my bike. And nothing. I don't use anything anymore.
See, now it's a different type of exercise, so therefore it should be, your body should be saying, okay, we're burning
Yep.
our calories.
I don't
Yeah.
even look at the numbers no more. All I care is when I go to the doctor that she doesn't give me no medicine. Other than that, I just.
As long as that A1C is where she wants it
That's
to be.
right. Just as long as I don't gotta stick that needle in me, I don't care.
Yeah, so 40 and 15 was what your doctor, 45 carbs in a meal.
That's
And then build
The whole day then?
and then
no, that's
40 a
per
meal.
eat per meal,
40 a meal?
40 a meal.
Oh,
That I
was for
found
the
is
whole
easier
day.
than
Yeah.
all day.
and then you know, build a balanced meal around that. So that's probably going to mean, you know, you're going to take in less meat and you know, if you have a balanced meal where the carbs are 45, you're not going to have a steak that takes up half the plate. a whole breast of a chicken.
And that's 3 meals a day then?
Mhm.
Like 40, 45?
40 meals, 40.
45 each meal.
But I didn't even do 40. I was lucky if I did 10.
Yeah, you tried to cut carbs out completely.
Yeah.
That's
a
that's
long
hard to
week.
do. But you need some carbs so that you have
I was doing
energy.
more protein than anything.
yeah.
'Cause I
And
ate a lot of meat, a lot of cheese, a lot of eggs.
What about fish? What's in fish?
fish is high in protein.
High in protein?
Yeah. But then you have to watch if you're consuming
Too.
if you're consuming almost exclusively protein, like the Atkins diet, then that's hard on the kidneys. So-
Yes, that's it.
Yeah. So that
Everything.
You can do it for, I
Right.
did it for so long and it was good, but then your body goes in, what is it, ketosis? So then you crave everything. So,
yeah, if you're not
yeah,
giving yourself any carbs, then your body starts to eat itself.
it's not easy. It's every day. It's just not easy.